First, they came for your emissions. Then they came for your internal combustion engine, and now they're coming for your tires. Make no mistake about it, prices are going to go up. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and this is not overly dramatic. This is real, and it's being driven by, surprise, the European Union and California. This will probably take a while before it comes here to America, but it is coming. I feel it in my heart. What we're talking about here today is that the European Union, the agency in the European Union that sets standards for their emissions and everything else, is coming out with new standards called Euro 7. They started talking about it last year, and I can't find a lot of specifics on some of this, but they're not only strengthening, again, all of the emissions for nitrous oxides and things like that, they're adding additional standards for ammonia and things like that, other smog-producing chemicals. But they're adding some new regulations specifically around microplastics, tiny, tiny particles that are going to come off not only your tires, but your brakes. Now, I haven't been able to find what these standards are going to be. It seems to still be in the process. And I'm going to provide a couple links below so you can go read the articles I'm actually reading. But this is from Reuters, and they are the European Union. The Euro 7 standards are trumpeting what a huge breakthrough this is of how much microplastics come off of tires. And there's a little bit of a silver lining here, honestly, if I'm being honest, but it means that our tires are going to cost more in the future, and they're actually putting regulations in place to force people to pay these higher prices. Now, there's no doubt that tires wear down. We all have common sense. We all know that. They have tread wear ratings on them and things like that. But as you look at a tire, it slowly abrases away and tiny little particulates are left away. Now, those particulates, largely derived from petroleum, have about 200 different chemicals in them. Most of them, they don't think they're terribly unsafe, but research is continuing, and they're certainly looking for a way to tie this to anything. But there is one called 6-ppd, which has been found to be affect salmon. And they have found it in studies in China in human urine, but there's no clear answer as to whether it has an impact on humans. So the European Union wants to limit the amount of these particulates. California is looking at it as a research into what this chemical is, the impact of it, and does it need to be limited to protect salmon and other portions of the food chain and its impact on humanity as well. Hard to argue with the safety side of it, but the result is that the Euro 7 standards are going to provide guidelines, regulations as to the wear on tires, or at least the particulates they are going to give off into the environment. Now, as a former civil engineer, this is not unusual or terribly unexpected. It took a turn I didn't expect, but we've always been interested in water quality. It's certainly become more important in the past 20, 30 years, something like that. And as an engineer, I designed water quality ponds. So if you think about a parking lot and people driving around on it and their tires slowly losing little tiny pieces of rubber all over the place, when it rains, that all washes over here towards the nearest drain. Now, if that drain is connected directly to a creek, it goes straight into the creek and out into a lake, down to the ocean. But what they've been doing for many, many years, and I've designed dozens or hundreds of them, is water quality ponds. And that is a way to take that first flush of the runoff, get it into a pond where it has a chance to settle, and the chemicals can be soaked out by plants, and the particulates can settle down before it goes out to the creek and onto the pond and the lake and everywhere else. This has been around for a long time, but what these new regulations are trying to do is reduce the amount of particles that are coming off of it. I don't want to hate on that, but Don't you think tire makers have been working on this, the durability and the longevity of their tires, for a long time? Now, one of the big things is there's many Chinese tire makers that are very, very popular in Europe. Some names I've never heard of before here in America. And what this regulation is going to do is, by setting standards, reduce the impact of those cheap Chinese tires in the European Union. And bigger companies like Michelin and Continental are stepping up and have been doing their research and reducing the amount of particulates that are coming off of their tires. Michelin, in between 2015 and 2020, they've figured out they did about a 5% decrease in the amount of particulates they have coming off. And there have been a lot of research into alternative materials to make tires out of, moving away from petroleum into other things. But that always brings up the question of what is that giving off? What more research needs to be done into those new particulates? And is it going to provide the treadwear, the safety, the handling of a traditional petroleum-based tire? There's a lot here, and it's a lot moving on, and Euro 7 seems to be driving all of this. But there's an excellent article I found over at Electrive. They were talking about this, and one of the things they brought up, which I did not think about, is that if they can't come up with a standard on how the tires should be measured at the beginning, this might push manufacturers to add capture devices. And what I mean by that is, when you brake, you know there's brake dust that comes off of it, right? We see it on our wheels. But what if they had a system that when you braked, it pulled the dust up into a filter? They could do the same thing with tires, build it into the housing to pull it up here. I think that's the future of what we're going to see here, and it concerns me. Anytime I see a government agency come out with new regulations, we all know it's going to increase costs. And anytime I see a government regulation say, we're keeping in mind a moderate cost, and then they give an estimate. In this case, it's less than 150 euros per car. I don't believe them. And then they say something about, like, for every dollar saved, every dollar spent, acknowledging it's going to be more expensive, it's going to say $5 somewhere else, whether it's in health or in public services, whatever it happens to be. But yet that $5 never seems to come back to the taxpayer as a credit. So you get to spend an extra dollar, but you never get your $5 back. So they're raising the cost on everything. And if these regulations truly mean that manufacturers in Europe have to add capture devices to pull that out and add filters, that's going to be more than 100 or 150 euros of additional machinery and weight in our cars. This all kind of caught me by surprise, because what I expected and what I've seen, some of the noise for the past couple years, is with the move to EVs, EVs are heavier. I just read a recent article comparing a Bolt to a Jetta, and I think the Bolt was about 700 pounds more expensive than the slightly larger Jetta. But people are beginning to come out of the woodwork and say that, hey, we're moving to EVs, and this is having an outsized impact on our roadways, on our infrastructure. And so that's where I thought this argument was going to go, not about the tire wear and microparticles that were coming out of it, but about the wear on the roads and whether EVs were paying their, quote, fair share of roadway maintenance. So this really kind of surprises me. And I'm going to go ahead and address that real quick. In my transportation courses, when you design a roadway, you design it, number one, for the speed limit. That's going to dictate how far you have to be able to see, how sharp the curves can be, hills, how sharp they can be to be able to see effectively to brake and respond to an emergency situation. But in terms of the actual roadway, the thickness of the asphalt, the thickness of that base course, the stone base course underneath it, that's driven largely by trucks, the amount of truck traffic you expect on something. In fact, I remember a professor telling me that for most roads, you ignore the cars because they're irrelevant. Your 4,000-pound car is irrelevant relative to the 50,000-pound tractor trailer that's driving down the road. So that's where I thought this was going to go, and I thought it'd be easily headed off. That EVs are heavier, but it's really not that much more relative to the damage it's doing to the roadways. But this particulate really kind of surprises me. Now, this is all about Europe. And again, I'll provide links below to the Reuters article I read and also that Electrive article. I'll provide that as well. But, of course, California needs to be at the forefront of this. They need to be the most progressive about this. And what California does, the rest of the nation follows 10 to 15 years later. So since California is looking at it, and they're looking at this chemical in the tires, if they start restricting that, it's going to impact the rest of the nation as well. And that means if they're moving to additional chemicals, different chemicals, longer tread wear, or a different product entirely beyond petroleum or a mix to create the tires, it's going to raise our prices. Because when you look at this, and you really stop to think about it, the Euro 7 standards are setting a standard that the cheap manufacturers can't make, that are popular in Europe. So they're popular because they're cheap. People are tired of paying expensive prices. So what do? They set a regulation, which means you have to pay the expensive price. This is what bureaucracy does. I'm not totally opposed to this. I'm not totally opposed to looking at the particulates coming off of our tires and how to deal with it. I'm not sure that the manufacturer side is the right answer here when we're already also addressing it on the infrastructure side. We'll see what happens. I'll keep you updated because this is one that really interests me. Let me know your thoughts below, guys.